What if the grand story of one of the world's most enduring civilizations, the story of Iran, does not begin where we have always been told it does? What if the magnificent edifice of the Persian Empire, the empire of Cyrus and Darius, was not the original blueprint but a grander, more successful second draft? What if, before the rise of the Achaemenids, there existed a phantom empire, a ghost kingdom that unified the Iranian peoples for the very first time, challenged the world's reigning superpower, and then vanished into the mists of history, its voice almost entirely silenced? This is not a tale of fiction. It is the investigation into a historical enigma, the search for a lost origin story. We are in pursuit of the Medes, the forgotten founders, the architects of the first Iranian empire. Their legacy is everywhere, woven into the very DNA of the Persian state that succeeded them. Their name forever linked with the Persians in the chronicles of their enemies and their allies. Yet, their own words are gone. Their own monuments are buried or have been claimed by others. They are a foundational power without a clear written testament, a kingdom whose story must be pieced together from the hostile records of their oppressors and the often mythologized accounts of their successors. To find the Medes is to search for a political ghost. It is to trace the outline of a mountain from the shadow it casts. We must become historical detectives, sifting through the propaganda of fallen empires and the legends of heroic kings to uncover the story of a people who rose from the scattered tribes of the Zagros Mountains to shatter the world order of their day. This is the story of a dream of unity, forged in the crucible of oppression, a dream that would lay the groundwork for one of the most influential empires in human history. It is the story of how a band of mountain horsemen dared to challenge the god-kings of Mesopotamia and, in doing so, created a new world. To understand the Medes, we must first understand the silence that surrounds them, and in that silence, learn to hear the echo of their monumental achievement. Theirs is not just a forgotten chapter in the history of Iran, it is the forgotten heart that gave the Persian lion its first roar. The world into which the Median dream was born was not a void. It was a world dominated by a single, terrifying reality: the Neo-Assyrian Empire. For 3 centuries, from their heartland in northern Mesopotamia, the Assyrians had crafted an empire that was not merely a state, but a sophisticated instrument of terror. They were the undisputed superpower of their age, and their power was built upon a foundation of absolute military supremacy and calculated psychological warfare. The Assyrian army was the most advanced and ruthless fighting machine the world had ever seen. They were masters of siegecraft, their engineers capable of bringing down the most formidable city walls with massive ramps, battering rams, and siege towers. Their iron-willed infantry, their powerful cavalry, and their swift, deadly chariots moved with a discipline and coordination that overwhelmed all who stood against them. But their greatest weapon was fear. The Assyrians did not just conquer, they annihilated. Their kings boasted in their royal inscriptions, which were carved onto the very walls of their palaces for all to see, of the mountains of skulls they had built, of the captured kings they had flayed alive, of the populations they had massacred or deported to the farthest corners of their empire. This was not random cruelty, it was state policy. The reliefs at Nineveh and Nimrud depict these acts in graphic, chilling detail: endless lines of captives being led away in chains, scribes meticulously counting severed heads, men being impaled on stakes outside the smoking ruins of their hometowns. This propaganda of terror was designed to break the will of their enemies before the first arrow was even fired. It was a message to the world: resistance is futile and will be met with an agonizing, systematic erasure from existence. The nations of the Near East, from the kingdoms of Israel and Judah to the city-states of Phoenicia and the ancient civilization of Babylonia, lived under the constant shadow of this threat. They paid crushing tribute, their economies drained to feed the insatiable Assyrian war machine. Their kings were puppets, their gods were carried off into captivity, and their people were subject to the whims of a distant, merciless monarch who styled himself the King of the Universe. This was the world that the scattered, disunited Iranian tribes of the Zagros Mountains inhabited. They were a people on the periphery, living in the highlands to the east of the Assyrian heartland. They were not yet a nation, but a collection of clans, breeders of magnificent horses which the Assyrians coveted and often took by force. They were frequent victims of Assyrian raids, their villages burned, their people carried off into slavery. They were, in the grand geopolitical calculus of the day, of little consequence. A fragmented people without a unified leadership, without fortified cities, without a hope of challenging the iron fist that gripped the world. It was in this climate of overwhelming fear and oppression, in this darkness, that the first sparks of a new fire would be struck. It was a fire of resistance, born not of ambition, but of desperation. A people can only be pushed so far before the choice becomes simple: unite or perish. The Medes were about to choose unity. On the high, rugged slopes of the Zagros Mountains, a range that forms the formidable spine of modern-day Iran, lived a constellation of tribes who would one day change the world. These were the Iranian peoples, a branch of the great Indo-European family who had migrated onto the plateau centuries earlier. Among them, the most prominent group, inhabiting the central and northwestern Zagros, were the Medes. They were not yet a nation in the modern sense. They were a people defined by a shared language and a common cultural heritage. But politically, they were fragmented, a loose confederation of clans and chieftaincies. Their society was largely pastoral, their wealth measured in livestock, particularly in the magnificent horses they bred, which were among the finest in the ancient world. They were semi-nomadic, moving with their flocks, living in small, unfortified villages scattered across the mountain valleys. Their political structure was tribal, loyalty given to a local chieftain or a lord of the village. There was no central authority, no single king to command their collective strength. This disunity made them vulnerable. To the west, in the plains of Mesopotamia, the Assyrian war machine was always hungry. The Assyrian annals are filled with accounts of campaigns into the Zagros, which they called the land of the Medes. These were not wars of conquest in the traditional sense. The Assyrians had little interest in permanently occupying the rugged, difficult terrain. Instead, they were brutal, extractive raids. The Assyrian army would sweep into the valleys to plunder what they needed most: horses. The Median horses were essential for the Assyrian cavalry and chariotry, the twin pillars of their military might. The tribute lists are explicit. Thousands of horses, along with cattle, sheep, and precious metals like lapis lazuli, were forcibly extracted. Along with this material plunder came human plunder. The Medes were rounded up and deported, their specialized skills as horse breeders and trainers exploited in the service of their oppressors. The psychological impact of these raids must have been devastating. It bred a deep-seated resentment and a powerful yearning for security. The Median experience was one of constant fear, of seeing their wealth stripped away and their people enslaved by a seemingly invincible foreign power. They were caught in a cycle of predation, their lack of unity ensuring their continued victimhood. Yet, the very mountains that isolated their clans also provided a measure of protection. The rugged terrain was difficult for the large, organized Assyrian armies to fully control. The Medes were skilled horsemen and warriors fighting on their home ground. They could retreat into the high valleys, harassing the invaders' supply lines, making the cost of occupation too high. They were a people being forged in the crucible of resistance. Every raid, every humiliation, every demand for tribute was a lesson in the brutal realities of power. It became increasingly clear that the old ways of tribal disunity were a death sentence. The choice was stark. Either remain a collection of scattered, vulnerable clans, a permanent resource pool for a predatory empire, or find a way to forge a single, sharp sword from the disparate shards of their people. The raw material for an empire was there. The hardy warriors, the magnificent horses, the strategic mountain terrain. What was missing was the most crucial element of all, a unifying idea and a leader capable of turning that idea into a kingdom. History is shaped by forces, but it is told through stories. In the case of the Median unification, the line between historical fact and foundational myth is beautifully blurred in the account of the Greek historian Herodotus. He tells the story of a man named Deioces, a figure of such wisdom and integrity that he became the catalyst for the birth of a nation. According to the legend, Deioces was a man of a minor village, but he possessed an unshakable passion for justice. In a time of lawlessness and strife among the Median tribes, people from his own village and then from neighboring villages began to bring their disputes to him. His judgments were so fair and his reasoning so sound that his reputation spread like wildfire. Soon, Medes from all across the region were bypassing their own local chieftains to seek his arbitration. He became the single point of order in a chaotic world. But Deioces, seeing that his life was now consumed by the affairs of others, declared that he could no longer continue. He withdrew from his public role, and lawlessness once again descended upon the land, even worse than before. The Medes, having tasted the fruits of order, were thrown into despair. They gathered in a great assembly and debated their future. They realized, Herodotus tells us, that they could not live this way. They needed a king, and there was only one man they trusted for the role. They sent a delegation to Deioces, offering him the crown. He accepted, but with conditions. He demanded that they build him a great capital city, a symbol of their newfound unity, and that all power be centralized in his hands. The Medes agreed. They built for him the magnificent city of Ecbatana, a fortress of concentric walls, each ring painted a different color, with the king's palace of gold and silver at the very center. From this throne, Deioces established the protocols of a royal court, instilling a sense of awe and reverence for the institution of kingship and uniting the Median tribes into a single, powerful nation. Whether Deioces was a real historical figure or a composite of early tribal leaders is debated by historians. The Assyrian records mention a Dayuku, who was a local chieftain, which may be a link. But the literal truth of the story is less important than the profound political and philosophical truth it represents. The story of Deioces is the personification of a social contract. It describes a people willingly surrendering a degree of individual freedom in exchange for collective security and justice. It portrays the birth of the state not as an act of conquest from above, but as a conscious choice from below. The Medes in this telling were not subjugated into a kingdom. They chose to create one out of a rational desire for a better, more orderly life. Ecbatana, the city we know today as Hamadan, becomes more than just a capital. It is the physical manifestation of this idea. It is the center of the world, the source of law, the place where the disparate tribes could look and see a reflection of their own collective strength. The legend of Deioces provided the Median state and the later Iranian empires with a powerful foundational myth. It rooted their concept of kingship not in brute force, but in justice. The rightful king, the ideal king, ruled because he was the guarantor of order and the protector of his people. He was the solution to chaos, not the cause of it. This was the idea, the ideological bedrock upon which a kingdom could be built, an idea powerful enough to rally mountain horsemen and, one day, to challenge the gods of Assyria. The path from a collection of tribes to a unified kingdom capable of challenging a superpower was neither short nor easy. The early years of the nascent Median kingdom were a brutal education in the realities of international power politics. After the initial unification, likely under a series of strong leaders personified by the legendary Deioces, the Medes entered a period of consolidation and struggle. The figure who emerges from the shadows of this era is Phraortes, whom Herodotus names as the son and successor of Deioces. If Deioces represents the principle of internal unification, Phraortes represents the ambition of external expansion. Having brought the Median tribes under a single banner, he reportedly turned his attention to the other Iranian peoples, most notably the Persians, who lived in the lands to the south, in what is now Fars province. He is said to have brought them under Median subjugation, uniting the two most powerful Iranian groups for the first time. This was a critical step. By creating a pan-Iranian domain, Phraortes was building a kingdom with the demographic and military weight to be a true regional power. However, this rising power on their eastern flank did not go unnoticed by the Assyrians. The lords of Nineveh were not prepared to tolerate a strong, unified kingdom in the mountains that had for so long been their private treasury of horses and slaves. The reign of Phraortes was defined by this inevitable and violent confrontation with the Assyrian Empire. He was not content to simply defend his mountain realm. He took the audacious step of marching his army down from the highlands and onto the Mesopotamian plains to challenge the Assyrians directly. This was a fatal miscalculation. The Median army, while formidable in its own rugged terrain, was not yet ready to face the full might of the Assyrian war machine on open ground. According to Herodotus, the campaign was a disaster. Phraortes was defeated and killed, and the bulk of his army was destroyed. This defeat was a devastating setback. It demonstrated that ambition and bravery alone were not enough to topple the world's masters. The Assyrians had once again asserted their dominance, and the Median dream was on the brink of being extinguished. The kingdom was left leaderless, its military shattered, its confidence broken. This was a crucible moment, a trial by fire that could have led to the complete collapse of the young state, causing it to fracture back into its constituent tribal parts. But instead, the defeat seems to have hardened Median resolve. It was a bitter lesson in the art of war and statecraft. They learned that to defeat the Assyrians, they could not simply imitate them. They needed to innovate. They needed a new kind of army, a new kind of leadership, and a new understanding of their enemies' weaknesses. The death of Phraortes was not the end of the story. It was the end of the first chapter. It set the stage for the arrival of a new leader, one who had learned from his father's failure, a man who would temper Median bravery with strategic genius, and who would spend his life meticulously planning the ultimate revenge. The dream of freedom had been deferred, but it had not died. It was merely waiting for the right man to carry it forward. Just as the Median kingdom was reeling from its catastrophic defeat at the hands of the Assyrians, a new and terrifying force swept down from the north, plunging the entire region into another generation of chaos. They were the Scythians, a wave of nomadic horse warriors from the vast, unforgiving steppes of Central Asia. The Scythians were a different kind of enemy. They were not a settled empire with cities to defend and supply lines to protect. They were a force of nature, a blizzard of arrows and hooves. They were masters of mounted archery, their warriors able to shoot with deadly accuracy from horseback, a tactical innovation that gave them a terrifying advantage. They lived in the saddle, their mobility allowing them to strike without warning and vanish back into the grasslands before a conventional army could respond. Their arrival in the Near East was a geopolitical earthquake. They poured through the Caucasus Mountains, driven by pressures from other nomadic groups farther east. They first clashed with the Sumerians, another nomadic people, before falling upon the settled civilizations of the south. The Median kingdom, weakened and demoralized after the death of Phraortes, was directly in their path. According to Herodotus, the Medes confronted the Scythian horde and were utterly defeated. The Scythians became the new masters of the region, their rule extending over Media for a period of 28 years. This was a time of humiliation and subjugation, which Herodotus describes as an era of violence and neglect. The Scythians were not empire builders. They were predators, interested in plunder and tribute, not administration. They roamed the land at will, their raiding parties terrorizing the countryside, their rule a chaotic and extractive tyranny that bled the Median kingdom dry. This period of Scythian domination, however, was also a period of intense and unwilling education. The Medes, a formidable horse people themselves, were forced to learn from the masters. They witnessed firsthand the devastating effectiveness of massed cavalry tactics and the strategic advantage of mobile archery. The Scythian storm was a harsh but necessary teacher. It forced the Medes to adapt and to innovate their own military structures. They had to become something new if they were ever to regain their freedom. This era of chaos also had a profound effect on the regional balance of power. The Scythians did not limit their raids to Media. They pushed westward into the heart of the Assyrian Empire, reaching the borders of Egypt. While the Assyrians were able to fend them off, the constant threat from these unpredictable nomadic raiders stretched their military resources thin and added another layer of instability to their already vast and complex empire. The Scythian presence weakened everyone, creating a power vacuum and fostering an environment where old enemies could find common cause. The darkness that had descended upon Media was a crucible. It was a time of suffering and servitude, but it was also a time of learning and hardening. The generation that grew up under the Scythian yoke would be tougher, more pragmatic, and more ruthless than the one that had preceded it. They were learning the brutal art of survival in a world of predators. And among them was a young prince, the son of the defeated Phraortes, who was watching, learning, and waiting for his moment to reclaim his father's throne and his people's destiny. He would not just expel the Scythians, he would absorb their strength and turn it against the old enemy who still loomed in the west. The storm from the steppes was about to give way to a perfectly engineered hurricane. Out of the darkness of the Scythian occupation, a leader emerged who would not only restore the Median kingdom, but elevate it to heights its founders could only have dreamed of. His name was Cyaxares, the son of Phraortes and the grandson of Deioces. He is the true architect of the Median Empire, a figure of immense historical importance, a man who possessed the rare combination of strategic vision, military genius, and ruthless determination. Cyaxares' early life was defined by the humiliation of his people. He grew up witnessing the chaos of Scythian rule and the memory of his father's catastrophic defeat at the hands of the Assyrians. These twin traumas forged in him a singular, all-consuming ambition to restore the honor of his dynasty and to achieve what his father could not: the complete and utter destruction of the Assyrian Empire. His first task was to liberate his own land. Herodotus provides a dramatic, if perhaps embellished, account of how he achieved this. Cyaxares, it is said, invited the Scythian chieftains to a great feast, plied them with wine until they were incapacitated, and then had them all massacred. With their leadership eliminated, he rallied the Median warriors and drove the remnants of the Scythian horde from his lands. Whether the story is literally true or not, it signifies a critical turning point. Cyaxares had re-established Median sovereignty, but he knew that liberation was not enough. He needed to build a new kind of army, one capable of not only defending Media but of projecting power across the region. He had learned the harsh lessons of his father's failure and the Scythian occupation. He completely reorganized the Median military. He was the first, according to Herodotus, to separate his troops into distinct units of spearmen, archers, and cavalry, moving beyond the tribal levy model to create a more professional, disciplined force. He embraced the tactics of his former oppressors, building a powerful cavalry arm that could rival the Scythians in mobility and firepower. He essentially fused the disciplined infantry traditions of the Near East with the devastating cavalry tactics of the Eurasian steppes, creating a military machine that was perfectly adapted to the challenges he faced. With his new army forged and tested, Cyaxares turned his gaze westward. The Assyrian Empire, while still immensely powerful, was showing signs of internal decay. It was overstretched, plagued by court intrigues, and now faced a new and formidable challenge from the south, where the Babylonians were stirring in revolt. Cyaxares saw the moment of opportunity that his predecessors had lacked. The world order was fragile, and he possessed the will and the weapon to shatter it. He was not just a king or a general, he was an avenger. He embodied the collective desire for retribution that had simmered in the hearts of the Median people for generations. He was preparing to march not just against a rival kingdom, but against the very idea of Assyria, against a legacy of terror that had haunted his people for centuries. The stage was being set for a final apocalyptic confrontation that would not just redraw the map of the ancient world, but would cleanse it with fire. Cyaxares was gathering his strength, and the walls of Nineveh, which had stood for centuries as a symbol of invincible power, were about to be tested as never before. Cyaxares was a brilliant strategist, and he understood a fundamental truth of power. No nation, no matter how strong, can stand alone against the entire world. His father had tried to challenge Assyria head-on and had been destroyed for it. Cyaxares would not repeat that mistake. He knew that to slay the Mesopotamian dragon, he needed allies. He found a willing and powerful partner in the south, in the ancient land of Babylonia. For centuries, Babylon, one of the world's oldest and most prestigious cities, had chafed under Assyrian rule. It had been conquered, its temples looted, and its people subjugated. The Babylonians harbored a deep and bitter resentment towards their northern masters. They had launched numerous rebellions, some of which had been brutally crushed. At one point, the Assyrian king Sennacherib had so completely destroyed the city that he claimed to have made it a wasteland for eternity. But the spirit of Babylon could not be extinguished. A new Chaldean dynasty had arisen, and a new leader, Nabopolassar, had declared himself king of Babylon and was engaged in a fierce war of independence against the Assyrians. Nabopolassar was a canny and experienced leader. He had managed to secure Babylonia itself, but he knew that as long as the Assyrian Empire existed, his kingdom would never be truly safe. He was fighting a desperate war of survival. When the envoys from Cyaxares, the king of the Medes, arrived at his court, he saw an opportunity to transform his struggle. Here was another former vassal people, a rising power from the mountains who shared his burning hatred for Assyria. Alone, they were rebels fighting for their lives. Together, they could be empire destroyers. An alliance was forged, a pact that would seal the fate of Assyria. This was a world-changing agreement. Two major powers, one from the Iranian plateau and one from the Mesopotamian plains, were joining forces. To cement this political and military bond, they sealed it with a royal marriage. Cyaxares' son, or in some accounts, Cyaxares himself, married the daughter of Nabopolassar, linking the two royal houses. This wedding was more than a ceremony. It was a declaration of intent. It signified the creation of a united front against a common enemy. The plan was simple and devastatingly effective. They would launch a coordinated two-front war. The Babylonians would push up from the south, along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, while the Medes would sweep down from the east, out of the Zagros Mountains. The Assyrian Empire, which had for so long projected its power outward, would now be forced into a defensive war, squeezed between two powerful and determined adversaries. The Alliance of Lions was born. It was a coalition built on a shared history of oppression and a mutual desire for vengeance. The news of this pact must have sent a shockwave of terror through the halls of Nineveh. The Assyrian kings had mastered the art of divide and conquer for centuries, playing their enemies against each other. Now, two of their most formidable victims had united, their combined strength far greater than the sum of their parts. The world order was tilting on its axis. The prey had learned to hunt together, and they were coming for the predator. The final war for the fate of the Near East had begun. The first major target of the new Medo-Babylonian alliance was not the grand political capital of Nineveh, but the city of Ashur. This was a move of profound strategic and psychological significance. Ashur was the ancient religious heart of the Assyrian people. It was named after their chief deity, the god Ashur himself, from whom the entire nation took its name. It was their spiritual home, the place where their kings were crowned and buried, the symbolic center of their universe. To attack Ashur was to strike not at the administrative brain of the empire, but at its very soul. In 614 BCE, the Median army, led by the relentless Cyaxares, descended from the mountains. They moved with a speed and ferocity that caught the Assyrians off guard. The Babylonian army, under Nabopolassar, was also on the march but had not yet arrived. The Medes did not wait. They fell upon the sacred city with a fury born of generations of resentment. The siege was swift and brutal. The Medes, having learned the arts of war from the Assyrians and the Scythians, were no longer just mountain warriors. They were a disciplined, effective siege army. The walls of the ancient capital were breached, and the Medes poured into the city. The sack of Ashur was total. The city was plundered, its temples desecrated, its population put to the sword. It was an act of symbolic vengeance. The Medes were repaying centuries of Assyrian raids in kind, visiting the same destruction upon the Assyrian heartland that had so often been inflicted upon their own. The Babylonian king Nabopolassar and his army arrived after the city had already fallen. Herodotus recounts a meeting between the two kings amidst the smoking ruins of the sacred city. There, on the site of their first great joint victory, Cyaxares and Nabopolassar are said to have reaffirmed their alliance, united in their shared triumph. The psychological impact of this event cannot be overstated. The news of the fall of Ashur would have spread across the Near East, sending a clear and terrifying message. The Assyrian Empire was not invincible. Its gods could not protect their own sacred city. The aura of divine favor that had surrounded the Assyrian kings for centuries was shattered. For the vassal peoples of the empire, from Syria to the Levant, the fall of Ashur was a sign that a new power was rising, that the end of the age of terror was at hand. Hope, a commodity that had been in short supply for generations, was rekindled. For the Assyrians themselves, it was a cataclysm, a sacrilege of the highest order. Their spiritual anchor was gone. It was a blow from which their morale would never fully recover. The victory at Ashur was a dress rehearsal for the main event. It proved the effectiveness of the Median army and the strength of the alliance. The lions had tasted first blood, and their appetite was whetted. They now turned their combined attention to the north, to the greatest prize of all, the sprawling, magnificent, and hated city of Nineveh, the political heart of the empire and the largest and most fortified city in the known world. The fall of Ashur was the prologue. The main act of the great drama of the world's remaking was the siege of Nineveh. This was not just another city. Nineveh was the embodiment of the Assyrian Empire at the zenith of its power. Situated on the eastern bank of the Tigris River, it was a metropolis of unprecedented scale and magnificence. Its kings, particularly Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal, had adorned it with colossal palaces, vast temples, and lush gardens. Its walls were the most formidable ever constructed, a double-layered fortification stretching for nearly 8 miles, punctuated by 15 massive gates. The main wall was so thick that, according to ancient accounts, several chariots could ride abreast on top of it. Inside these walls lived hundreds of thousands of people. It was the administrative center of a global empire, a hub of commerce, and the home of the royal library of Ashurbanipal, which contained tens of thousands of clay tablets documenting the accumulated knowledge of Mesopotamian civilization. But to its enemies, Nineveh was something else entirely. It was the city of blood, as the Hebrew prophet Nahum called it, a cauldron of lies and plunder. Its splendor was built on the suffering of countless victims. Its gardens were watered with the tears of deported nations. Its palaces were decorated with the tribute of subjugated kings. The city was a monument to a global system of violent extraction, and the world hated it with a righteous passion. In 612 BCE, the combined forces of the Median and Babylonian armies arrived before its walls. They were joined by other groups, including the Scythians, who were now eager to share in the plunder of their former masters. A vast international coalition, united by their shared desire to see Nineveh burn, laid siege to the great city. The siege was an epic undertaking that lasted for 3 months. The Assyrians, fighting for their very survival, mounted a desperate defense. The walls that had been designed to intimidate the world now served as their last refuge. But the attacking forces were relentless. The Babylonians and Medes brought their sophisticated siege engines to bear, while their archers rained arrows on the defenders. The turning point, according to ancient sources, came with the help of nature. The Tigris River, swollen by unusually heavy rains, flooded and undermined a section of the city's outer wall, causing it to collapse. This breach was the opening the attackers needed. They poured into the city, and the final battle for Nineveh became a brutal street-by-street slaughter. The Assyrians, who had shown no mercy to others, now received none. The city was given over to an orgy of destruction that lasted for days. The magnificent palaces were looted and set ablaze. The temples were torn down. The population was massacred. The rage that was unleashed upon Nineveh was the culmination of 3 centuries of pent-up hatred. It was not just a military conquest, it was an act of cathartic, apocalyptic vengeance. The end had come for the capital of terror. The destruction of Nineveh in 612 BCE was more than just the fall of a city. It was the end of an epic. It was a moment of such profound and violent transformation that its echoes were felt across the entire ancient world. The fire that consumed the palaces of the Assyrian kings was a signal fire, announcing that the old order was dead and a new one was being born from its ashes. The inferno was not merely destructive, it was cathartic. For the peoples of the Near East who had suffered for generations under the Assyrian yoke, the news of Nineveh's fall was a cause for wild celebration. It was a moment of liberation, a collective exhalation of breath that had been held for 300 years. The Hebrew prophet Nahum, whose entire biblical book is a long, taunting poem anticipating this very event, captured the sentiment of the age. "Woe to the city of blood," he had written. "Nineveh is in ruins. Who will mourn for her?" The answer was, no one. The empire that had built its foundation on fear had no friends, no allies to come to its aid in its final hour. It had sown the wind, and it was now reaping the whirlwind. The sack of the city was systematic and absolute. The allied forces, led by the Medes and Babylonians, were not interested in preserving it. They were interested in erasing it. They looted its treasures, the accumulated wealth of centuries of conquest, and then they set it ablaze. The fire was so intense that it turned the mud brick walls of the great palaces into reddened, baked ceramic, which is why their foundations survive to this day. The great library of Ashurbanipal, a priceless repository of human knowledge, was buried in the wreckage. In a profound historical irony, the very fire that destroyed the palace served to fire the clay tablets of the library, baking them into hard, durable ceramic and thus preserving them for future archaeologists to discover. The flames consumed the empire but accidentally immortalized its culture. With Nineveh gone, the remaining vestiges of the Assyrian state crumbled quickly. A remnant of the Assyrian army held out for a few more years in the city of Haran. But their cause was hopeless. The empire was decapitated, its heart ripped out. The world that had been defined by the singular power of Assyria was now a vacuum, waiting to be filled. The Medes and their Babylonian allies were the undisputed heirs to this broken world. They had not just defeated their enemy, they had annihilated them so completely that the Assyrians as a distinct political and ethnic entity would largely disappear from history. The fall of Nineveh was a testament to the vision and tenacity of Cyaxares and Nabopolassar. It was a victory for collaborative power, a demonstration that even the most formidable tyranny can be brought down when the oppressed find the courage to unite. A new map of the world was being drawn, its borders sketched in the ash and rubble of the greatest city of its time. The age of Assyria was over. The age of the Medes and Babylonians had begun. The annihilation of the Assyrian Empire left a massive power vacuum in the Near East. The world had been dominated by a single superpower for so long that its sudden absence created a new and dynamic geopolitical landscape. The victorious allies, the Medes and the Babylonians, were the primary beneficiaries, and they moved swiftly to divide the spoils of their victory. a new world order emerged, roughly balanced between these two great powers. The Babylonians, under Nabopolassar and his even more famous son Nebuchadnezzar II, inherited the Fertile Crescent, the historic heartland of Mesopotamia, along with Syria, Phoenicia, and the kingdoms of the Levant. They established the Neo-Babylonian Empire, which would enjoy a brief but brilliant golden age, turning Babylon into one of the most magnificent cities in history. The Medes, under the visionary Cyaxares, took the northern and eastern portions of the fallen empire. Their domain was a vast, mountainous territory stretching from the Zagros highlands across northern Mesopotamia and, crucially, westward into the Anatolian Peninsula, what is modern-day Turkey. The Median Empire was now a reality, a sprawling, multi-ethnic state that had been forged in the crucible of war. They had transformed themselves in a single generation from a collection of vassal tribes into one of the two most powerful kingdoms on earth. Having vanquished their ancient foe, Cyaxares did not rest. He pushed his armies farther west, consolidating his control over the peoples of Anatolia and absorbing the remnants of the kingdom of Urartu around Lake Van. This relentless westward expansion, however, brought him into direct conflict with another major power in the region, the Kingdom of Lydia, located in western Anatolia. The Lydians were a wealthy and powerful people, famous for being the first to mint coins of pure gold and silver. Their king, Alyattes, was an ambitious ruler who was not prepared to see his own sphere of influence encroached upon by the upstart Medes. A new great power conflict erupted. For 5 years, the Medes and the Lydians fought a bitter, indecisive war for control of central Anatolia. The war was a bloody stalemate, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The world had traded a single superpower for a new era of great power competition. This conflict, and the era of the New World Order, would be defined by a single astonishing event, an episode so strange and dramatic that it seems to have been plucked from the pages of myth. The long struggle between Media and Lydia was about to come to a sudden and celestial conclusion, an event that would cement the Median Empire's status on the world stage and demonstrate that its destiny was, quite literally, written in the stars. The world had been remade by fire, and it was about to be reshaped by an impossible darkness at noon. The 5-year war between the rising Median Empire and the wealthy kingdom of Lydia had been a grinding, bloody affair. The two great powers battled for supremacy over the Anatolian plateau, with the Halys River forming a de facto border between their territories. In the 6th year of the conflict, in 585 BCE, the armies of the Median king Cyaxares and the Lydian king Alyattes drew up for yet another major battle on the banks of the Halys. The fighting was fierce, the outcome uncertain, and then something happened that struck terror and awe into the hearts of both armies. The sky began to darken. The sun, which had been shining brightly, started to disappear, its light devoured by an encroaching shadow. A strange, cold twilight fell upon the battlefield. The birds went silent. The stars began to appear in the midday sky. A total solar eclipse had plunged the world into an unnatural darkness. For the soldiers in the midst of battle, this was not a predictable astronomical phenomenon. It was a terrifying omen, a sign of divine displeasure. They saw it as the gods themselves intervening to stop the slaughter. The battle came to an abrupt halt. The soldiers threw down their weapons, their enmity forgotten in the face of this shared cosmic terror. The kings, Cyaxares and Alyattes, were equally moved. They took the eclipse as a clear signal that they should end their war. They immediately ceased hostilities and negotiated a peace treaty. The Halys River was formally established as the border between their two empires, a boundary that would remain stable for decades. To seal this divinely ordained peace, they arranged a marriage between Astyages, the son of Cyaxares, and Arianis, the daughter of Alyattes. The war that had begun with bloodshed ended with a wedding. This extraordinary event, known as the Battle of the Eclipse, was famously recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus. What makes his account so remarkable is that he states that Thales of Miletus, one of the earliest Greek philosophers and scientists, had actually predicted the eclipse, warning the Ionians that it would happen in the very year that it occurred. This detail marks a pivotal moment in human intellectual history, a point where scientific prediction begins to intersect with historical events. The Battle of the Eclipse was a profound moment for the Median Empire. It solidified their status as a major world power and equal to the great kingdoms of Lydia and Babylon. The event was seen as a sign of divine favor, legitimizing their new empire in the eyes of the world. It showed that Cyaxares was not just a ruthless conqueror, but a wise statesman, capable of choosing a negotiated peace over endless, costly warfare. He had achieved his primary goal, securing a stable western frontier for his empire. With the Lydian War concluded, the Median Empire entered its golden age. It was secure, prosperous, and recognized as one of the three great pillars of the New World Order, alongside Babylonia and Lydia. For the first time in centuries, a degree of stability and balance had returned to the Near East. The age of the single predatory superpower was over, replaced by a multipolar world where diplomacy and treaties, like the one signed under the shadow of the eclipsed sun, played as important a role as military might. The Medes had arrived. Their journey from oppressed mountain tribe to arbiters of global destiny was complete. With its borders secured by treaties and its great enemy vanquished, the Median Empire, at its zenith, was a formidable and influential power. For several decades during the reigns of the great Cyaxares and his son Astyages, the empire enjoyed a period of stability and prosperity. The heart of this vast domain was the capital city, Ecbatana, modern-day Hamadan. Nestled in a high valley of the Zagros Mountains, Ecbatana was both a fortress and a symbol of royal power. According to the descriptions left by Greek historians like Herodotus and Polybius, it was a magnificent and heavily fortified city. Herodotus's account of its construction under Deioces, with its 7 concentric walls each painted a different color, culminating in a central citadel with a treasury and palace gleaming with silver and gold, is likely a romanticized and idealized vision. However, archaeological evidence, though limited, suggests that Ecbatana was indeed a major urban center, strategically located and well-defended. It served as the summer capital for the later Achaemenid kings, a testament to its pleasant climate and enduring importance. From this center, the Median kings ruled a diverse, multi-ethnic empire. Their territory encompassed all of western Iran, northern Mesopotamia, parts of Armenia, and a huge swath of eastern Anatolia. They controlled the vital trade routes that crossed the Iranian plateau, the so-called Silk Road in its infancy, bringing them immense wealth from the transit of goods. The administration of this large state required a sophisticated system of governance. While the Medes left no written records of their own, it is widely believed by scholars that they developed the precursor to the famous Persian satrapy system. The empire was likely divided into provinces, each ruled by a governor or satrap, who was responsible for collecting tribute, administering justice, and raising troops for the royal army. This decentralized model was a practical necessity for ruling a vast territory with varied geography and a mosaic of different peoples, each with their own local customs and languages. Median society was highly stratified. At the top was the king, an absolute monarch whose authority was backed by a powerful army. Beneath him was a warrior aristocracy, a class of Median nobles who held high military and administrative posts and were bound to the king by oaths of loyalty. One of the most intriguing and powerful elements of Median society was the priestly caste known as the Magi. The Magi were responsible for the religious rites and rituals of the kingdom. While the exact nature of Median religion is unclear, it was likely an early form of Zoroastrianism or a related Iranian faith. The Magi were not just priests, they were dream interpreters, astrologers, and advisors to the king, wielding immense influence at the royal court. Their power was so great that the term magic is derived from their name. The empire built by the Medes was a landmark achievement. They were the first to unite the Iranian peoples and to project that unified power onto the world stage. They created a stable and organized state that stood as an equal to the ancient kingdoms of Mesopotamia and Anatolia. They had shattered the old world order and created a new one in its place. But empires, like all things, are subject to the ravages of time and the ambitions of men. The very success of the Median state created the conditions for its own eventual transformation. The foundations they laid were so strong that they would become the launching pad for an even greater empire, one that would be led by a new dynasty from a closely related, once vassal land. The central and most frustrating mystery of the Median Empire is its silence. We have accounts of their deeds, their wars, and their kings from the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Greeks. We see the magnificent empire they built reflected in the records of their enemies and their successors. But from the Medes themselves, we have almost nothing. No royal inscriptions boasting of their victories, no chronicles detailing the reigns of their kings, no administrative tablets documenting the daily workings of their state. It is a historical phantom limb. We can see precisely where it should be, we can feel its weight and influence, but the thing itself is not there. This silence is profound and has led to centuries of scholarly debate. Why did a power of such magnitude, one that stood as a world leader for over half a century, leave behind no written testament to its own existence? One theory is that the Medes had a predominantly oral culture. Like many societies with Indo-European roots, they may have prioritized the memorization and oral recitation of their history, their sacred texts, and their epic poems. The priestly caste of the Magi may have been the custodians of this tradition, passing down knowledge from generation to generation through spoken word rather than written script. In such a culture, writing might have been seen as a tool for merchants and administrators, not a suitable medium for the sacred stories of the nation. If this is the case, then the Median legacy was not written in stone, but in the memory of its people, a memory that was eventually subsumed and overwritten by the rise of the Persians. Another possibility is that their records simply did not survive. They may have written on perishable materials like parchment or leather, which would have disintegrated over the millennia in the harsh climate of the Iranian plateau. The great city of Ecbatana has been continuously inhabited for nearly 3,000 years, making large-scale archaeological excavation of the Median levels extremely difficult. The Median capital may still hold its secrets deep beneath the foundations of the modern city of Hamadan. It is also possible that their records were deliberately destroyed or suppressed when the Persians under Cyrus the Great supplanted the Median dynasty. They may have engaged in a form of cultural rebranding, minimizing the achievements of their predecessors to enhance their own. While Cyrus was famously tolerant, later Persian kings might have seen a benefit in centering the narrative of Iranian glory solely on themselves. This lack of a native voice has had a significant impact on how history remembers the Medes. We are forced to see them through the eyes of others, which are never unbiased. The Greeks, particularly Herodotus, are our most detailed source, but his work is a mixture of genuine historical inquiry, gossip, and folklore. He wrote over a century after the events he describes, relying on oral traditions that were likely colored by Persian perspectives. The result is that the Median Empire often feels less like a solid historical reality and more like a mythic prequel to the grand, well-documented story of Persia. This unwritten legacy makes the Median achievement all the more remarkable. They are a testament to the fact that a people's impact on history is not always measured by what they wrote, but by what they built and what they made possible. The Medes built a powerful state that changed the world, and they made the Persian Empire possible. Their silence is not a sign of their insignificance, but a challenge to us as historians and storytellers, forcing us to listen more closely to the echoes and whispers they left behind in the actions of others, and to reconstruct the story of a kingdom that chose to write its legacy not on clay tablets, but on the map of the world itself. The golden age of the Median Empire, established by the military genius of Cyaxares, was inherited by his son, Astyages. Astyages ascended to the throne in 585 BCE, the same year that the Battle of the Eclipse brought peace with the Lydian kingdom. He ruled for 35 years, a long period of apparent stability and peace. The empire was at its peak, a tripartite world order shared with Babylonia and Lydia. The tribute flowed into Ecbatana, and the Median court was likely a place of immense wealth and luxury. However, the historical sources, primarily the Greeks, paint a picture of Astyages as a ruler who was very different from his father. While Cyaxares was a warrior king forged in the crucible of war and rebellion, Astyages was a man who inherited a finished empire. He represents a classic historical archetype, the son who lacks the drive and vision of the founding father. The Greek accounts portray him as decadent, complacent, and increasingly cruel. Herodotus tells stories of his lavish court and his tyrannical behavior, which began to alienate the powerful Median nobility, who were the pillars of the state. He is said to have grown suspicious and paranoid, a ruler more concerned with the comforts of his palace than the administration of his vast realm. This portrayal may be colored by the biases of the sources, which were written after his downfall and sought to justify the rise of his successor. It is a common trope in history to depict the loser of a power struggle as decadent and unworthy to rule. However, it is likely that there is a kernel of truth in the narrative. The Median warrior class, which had followed Cyaxares with fierce loyalty, may have grown restless under a king who did not lead them in battle. The energy and ambition that had fueled the empire's creation were beginning to dissipate, replaced by the inertia of established power. The greatest threat to Astyages, however, was not from a foreign enemy. The empire had no serious external challengers. The threat was growing from within, from his own family and from the heart of the Iranian world he ruled. Through the peace treaty with Lydia, Astyages was married to a Lydian princess, but he had also forged a political marriage with one of his most important vassal peoples, the Persians. He had married his daughter, Mandane, to a Persian nobleman. This union produced a child, a grandson, who was half Mede and half Persian. This grandson was named Cyrus. The story of Astyages is inextricably linked to the legendary birth of this child. Herodotus tells the famous tale of how Astyages had a dream in which a vine grew from his daughter's womb and overshadowed all of Asia. Terrified by this omen, which his magi interpreters told him meant his grandson would one day rule in his place, Astyages ordered the infant Cyrus to be killed. But the courtier tasked with the gruesome deed could not bring himself to do it, and instead gave the baby to a humble herdsman to be raised in obscurity in the mountains. The story is a myth, but it is a myth that serves a powerful political purpose. It casts Cyrus as a figure of destiny, a man whose rise to power was fated and who survived the unjust tyranny of his own grandfather. It suggests that Astyages' rule had become so corrupt that it had lost its divine legitimacy. The seeds of revolution were being sown, not in the distant provinces, but in the royal court and the prophetic dreams of the king himself. The long, peaceful reign of the last Median king was a calm before the storm. The empire he had inherited was about to be transformed from within, and the agent of that transformation was the very grandson he had tried and failed to destroy. The story of the rise of Cyrus the Great is a foundational epic, a tale where myth and history intertwine to create the origin story of the Persian Empire. At the heart of this story is his relationship with his maternal grandfather, the Median king Astyages. According to the legend told by Herodotus, the infant Cyrus was not killed as ordered, but was raised by a herdsman and his wife in a remote Persian village. He grew up unaware of his royal lineage, but his noble character could not be hidden. In a childhood game, the other boys chose him to be their king, and he took the role seriously, having one of the other boys, the son of a Median nobleman, punished for disobedience. When the nobleman complained to King Astyages about this insolence from a commoner's son, the boy Cyrus was brought before the court. Astyages was struck by the boy's proud demeanor and resemblance to his own family. Upon questioning the herdsman, the truth was revealed. This was his grandson, the child he had ordered to be killed. Astyages punished the courtier, who had deceived him with horrific cruelty, but decided that since Cyrus had already been king in a game, the prophecy had been fulfilled in a trivial way, and the boy was no longer a threat. He sent Cyrus away to live with his true parents in Persia. This was Astyages' fatal mistake. Cyrus grew up in Persia, the land of his father, as a prince of this vassal kingdom. He was charismatic, brilliant, and ambitious. He became the leader of the Persians, who, while subjects of the Medes, were a proud and powerful people in their own right. He saw the decadence of the Median court under his grandfather and the growing discontent among the Median nobility. He began to plot a rebellion, not just to free Persia but to claim the entire empire for himself. He united the Persian tribes and prepared for war. Astyages, finally realizing the threat posed by the grandson he had spared, mustered the Median army and marched to crush the rebellion. But his own cruelty had come back to haunt him. The commander he chose to lead his army was Harpagus, the very same courtier whose son Astyages had brutally murdered years earlier as punishment for failing to kill the infant Cyrus. Harpagus, who had been secretly communicating with Cyrus and plotting his revenge, betrayed Astyages on the battlefield. A significant portion of the Median army defected to Cyrus's side. The battle was a disaster for Astyages. He was defeated and captured. Cyrus marched on Ecbatana, the Median capital, which fell without a major fight. The reign of the last Median king was over. The grandson from the fringes, the child of destiny, had fulfilled the prophecy of the dream. The year was 550 BCE. This was the moment of transition. The power that had been centered in Media for nearly a century now passed to Persia. The torch had been passed from one Iranian people to another, from a grandfather to his grandson. The victory of Cyrus the Great over his grandfather Astyages was not a typical conquest. It was not the subjugation of a foreign people or the destruction of a rival culture. It was, in essence, an internal transfer of power within the Iranian world, a dynastic and political shift from one branch of the ruling elite to another. This is the key to understanding the seamless transition from the Median Empire to the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Cyrus did not treat the Medes as a conquered enemy. He treated them as partners. After capturing Astyages, he spared his life, a gesture of magnanimity that was also a shrewd political move. He presented himself not as a destroyer of the Median kingdom, but as its legitimate successor. He was, after all, Astyages' grandson, with Median royal blood flowing in his veins. He did not sack the Median capital of Ecbatana. Instead, he made it one of his own administrative centers, a co-capital alongside his Persian cities. He understood that the Median Empire had a sophisticated administrative structure and a powerful, experienced nobility, and he had no intention of dismantling it. He planned to build upon it. Cyrus absorbed the Median elite directly into the structure of his new empire. Median nobles were appointed to high positions as generals, governors, and court officials, serving alongside their Persian counterparts. This policy of co-option was brilliant. It prevented any lingering resentment from festering into a future rebellion and allowed him to harness the centuries of Median experience in imperial governance. The Medes were not demoted. They were incorporated as junior partners in a grander enterprise. This fusion of the two peoples was so complete that to the outside world, particularly the Greeks, the terms Mede and Persian were often used interchangeably. When they referred to the great wars with the Achaemenid Empire, they often called them the Medic Wars. In the Bible, The immutable law of the new empire is referred to as the law of the Medes and Persians, signifying a joint authority. This linguistic quirk is a powerful testament to the perceived equality and deep integration of the two groups. The nascent Persian Empire became a direct inheritor of Median culture. The Persians adopted Median styles of court dress with its distinctive flowing robes and felt caps. They absorbed Median court protocol and ceremony. The Achaemenid art that would adorn the palaces of Pasargadae and Persepolis shows a clear and direct stylistic lineage from earlier Median traditions. The Median Empire did not die in 50 BCE. It was transformed. It was like a powerful river that was diverted into a new, larger channel. The energy, the structure, and the water remained the same, but the name of the river was changed. The Median contribution was the essential foundation upon which Cyrus could build his vast, world-spanning empire with breathtaking speed. The Medes had done the hard work. They had unified the Iranian tribes, overthrown the region's dominant superpower, and established the first imperial framework. Cyrus, the visionary genius, took this powerful but raw foundation and refined it, expanded it, and imbued it with a new ideology of tolerance and multiculturalism that would become the hallmark of Achaemenid rule. The torch was not extinguished. It was simply passed to a new runner who would carry it farther and faster than anyone could have imagined. What, then, is the ultimate legacy of the Median Empire? How do we assess the impact of this ghost kingdom, this empire that left behind no voice of its own? The answer lies not in what the Medes wrote, but in what they did and what they made possible. Their legacy is not a library of texts, but the very existence of the Persian Empire itself. They were the indispensable first chapter in the long story of Iranian statecraft. Their primary achievement was the creation of a unified Iranian identity. Before the Medes, the Iranian peoples were a fractured collection of tribes, vulnerable to predation by more organized powers. The Medes were the first to forge these disparate groups into a single political entity, creating a sense of shared destiny and collective strength. They were the architects of Iranian unity. This act alone was revolutionary. Secondly, they were the great destroyers, and in this destruction, they were creators. By leading the coalition that brought down the mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire, they fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of the ancient world. They shattered a centuries-old system of terror and oppression, opening up a space for new powers and new ideas to flourish. The fall of Nineveh was a world historical event, and the Medes were its primary agents. They did not just free themselves, they liberated the entire Near East from the Assyrian shadow, paving the way for the rise of Babylonia's golden age and, most importantly, their own imperial destiny. Finally, the Medes provided the institutional and cultural blueprint for their Achaemenid successors. The concept of a pan-Iranian empire, the administrative model of satrapies, the protocols of the royal court, and the fusion of military power with a divinely sanctioned kingship, all of these were likely Median innovations. The Persian Empire, for all its glory and originality, did not spring from a vacuum. It was built upon the solid, if now invisible, foundations laid by the Medes. The ghost of Media haunted the Persian machine in the best possible way. It was its institutional memory, its cultural DNA. The seamless integration of the Median and Persian elites by Cyrus the Great is a testament to this fact. The Medes were not erased. They were absorbed into a grander synthesis. They became the silent partners in one of the most successful imperial enterprises in human history. To look for the Medes is to understand that a people's legacy can be measured in the success of their children. The Achaemenid Empire was the child of the Median state, and it carried its parents' genetic code as it went on to conquer the world. The Median Empire may seem lost to us, its voice muted by time. But if we look at the reliefs at Persepolis, we see Median nobles standing in places of honor next to the Persians. If we read the Greek accounts of the Great Persian Wars, we hear the echo of their name. And if we trace the very idea of a unified Iranian state back to its source, we find ourselves not in the grand palaces of Darius, but in the mountain fortress of Ecbatana with the forgotten kings who first dared to dream of an empire. Theirs is the silent, beating heart of a legacy that has endured for over 2.5 millennia. Our investigation into the lost origin story of Iran comes to a close. We have journeyed back in time, seeking the ghost of an empire, and what we have found is not a void, but a powerful, foundational presence that shaped the course of history. The Medes, who began as a scattered collection of mountain tribes, achieved something extraordinary. They looked upon a world dominated by an empire of terror and did not despair. They chose unity over fragmentation, courage over submission. They were the first to weave the disparate threads of the Iranian peoples into a single, strong tapestry. Their story is a testament to the power of an idea. The idea that justice is preferable to chaos, that unity is the only true shield against oppression, and that even the most formidable of tyrannies can be brought down by the collective will of the oppressed. They were the architects of a new world order, the leaders of the Great Coalition that extinguished the fires of Nineveh and liberated the ancient Near East. The Median Empire, in its brief but brilliant tenure as a world power, laid the institutional and cultural groundwork for everything that was to follow. They were the mentors, the older brothers, who paved the way for their Persian successors. The torch of imperial power was passed from them to Cyrus the Great, not in an act of foreign conquest, but as a family inheritance, a transition of leadership within the great house of Iran. The reason the Medes seem so elusive to us today is not because they failed, but because their success was so completely absorbed by the even greater success of the Achaemenids. Their legacy is not written in monuments bearing their own names, but in the stability, the structure, and the cultural fusion that defined the Persian Empire. They are the invisible foundation of one of the world's most magnificent and enduring political edifices. The story of the Medes reminds us that history is a layered thing, that beneath every great achievement lies a series of earlier, often forgotten struggles and triumphs. They are a powerful symbol of the quiet foundational work that makes later glory possible. Theirs is the silent, steady heartbeat beneath the roar of the Persian lion. They are the lost origin, the forgotten first draft, the phantom kingdom whose spirit animated the body of one of history's greatest empires. Their story was not lost. It was simply transformed, woven so seamlessly into the fabric of their successor's tale that it became the very ground upon which that tale was told. The Ghost Empire was not a ghost at all. It was the soul of the machine,